Hey friends, welcome to Homebrew Hobbies. We're the Hardman Brothers. I'm Calvin.
I'm Max. Good morning.
Today we got a pretty cool topic. We're getting into dungeon delving. But before we do, Max, you got anything to share with everybody?
Yeah, actually, so I've had a busy intermediate period.
Interregnum.
Um, Reckon. So I've been playing a lot of World of Warcraft.
Mm.
I reached level cap for the current phase. They're doing it in level bands right now. So I'm level 25. Let's see. Oh, I played a little bit of. I went to a friend's house and played a little bit of Guilty Gear Strive
Mm.
with first experience on a fight stick, which is like an arcade cabinet has like a lever and
Oh,
buttons, right?
whoa, nice.
Except this one is the hitbox, which has only buttons. I was a little rusty to start with, and on top of that, I've never used an all-button controller like that, and it was hard. I did not have a good grasp on it.
No joysticks?
No joysticks.
Oh, wow.
No joysticks.
Dang, that's
Yeah,
uh that's
it's
super cool.
yeah, it's mad cool.
Was this at a
Um,
friend's house or an arcade or something?
no, it's a friend's house. He I
Dang.
think he's borrowing the hitbox from someone else he knows.
Yeah, that's cool.
Um, but it was good to get a little practice on it because I plan to get one for myself.
Oh,
Um,
dang. You've been going pretty hard on Guilty Gear?
I actually stopped for a while to be playing WoW, but I will be picking Guilty Gear back up
Nice.
right around the turn of holidays, turn of the year.
Yeah.
How about yourself? Anything interesting?
Yeah, so recently went out to California, spent some time with family and one of our friends, Zach, did some Smash Bros for the first time in a while, quite a while. Um,
Very nice.
yeah, that's the closest I get to like a real fighter because they're pretty technical and I'm not fast twitchy, so to speak. But it was a lot of fun. So yeah, hanging out there. Actually, oh man, we did some board games recently, and I definitely wanted to bring up one of my new favorites is Dune, and this is not Dune Imperium, the new one, but it's an old board game from like the 60s or 70s, the olden days. Yeah, and it's super fun. I would call it like maybe a 5X strategy game, but there's some social intrigue. You make alliances when one of the worms comes up. So a worm comes out of the desert, and everyone's like, "Oh, like we're all competing to for resources and such." And then you got like the Emperor, the Fremen, the Atreides,
Of
the
course.
Harkonnen. So all the classic factions, and it's like, okay, who's going to ally with who?
I
Um,
like that. I would expect no less of a Dune board game than for there to be at least some political intrigue.
oh yeah, yeah. I would say it goes pretty deep. And
Nice.
then on the straight up strategy side, very solid compared to other comparable games. And then the combat is a little bit like Risk, but less random chance. In fact, there's no random chance except
Okay.
in the cards that you get throughout the game. But I would say it's mostly up to your tactics, and almost nothing is dependent on chance, which I like a lot in a game. It's like I proved my merit, I won, you
Yeah,
know.
that sounds super dope. I have to look into that because it's right up my alley. Of
Yeah, and this is a remade version of that older version from, like I said, the olden days. So it's been re-released. It was a lot of fun. Other than that, I've not been playing WoW, but for me right now, it's not something I have the time for, but I really want to. So I'm always going to look back on this period of the season of Discovery as like the perfect game that I never got to play, you know? So I glorify it already.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you, it's pretty glorious. It has its bugbears, not literally,
Mhm.
unfortunately. That was so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not perfect, but it is turning out to be a lot of fun.
Well, wait, did you just use bugbears as like a synonym for the flaws in a game?
Yeah, that's like I think it's a
That's a
well-known
saying?
phrase. I mean, it's well known to me at least.
Why is that so? Are bugbears regarded poorly?
I don't know. Don't ask me, man.
Just a
They're
phrase.
monsters. I think that is kind of the
Okay.
implication.
I guess I get it. Yeah. It has its bugbears. Yes, I've been excited. I do want to play it, but I probably will come back, you know, in a few years or hopefully sooner than that. We'll see. But
Fingers crossed. If you do, I'm running a guild.
oh, nice. I think that's actually a great transition into our first question today. So I remember when Hardcore WoW came out, I kept hearing look out for not actual instances or dungeons, but things that are like a cave where there's only one way in, one way out. Be very prepared
Yeah,
because of the permadeath. So I think that's kind of similar to this idea of like, what is a dungeon? Because people were saying like, oh, well, this house isn't exactly it's not a cave, but you gotta treat it as if because you might pull mobs from the surrounding area and so on.
right.
So let's get into what we consider to be a dungeon, and in the context of D&D as a DM, how do we prepare our players for that? Let's start with what counts. So how would you define a dungeon?
I think a dungeon is any structure that was made by a humanoid or intelligent creature um, that was designed to protect or contain something. Yeah, commonly that's going to be
Mm,
like treasure, that's where you hide your treasure vault,
oh yeah.
or that's where you put your prisoners, like in a literal dungeon.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's ultimately what makes it different from other like adventures, right? Is
Hmm.
is the man-made or made by intelligent beings.
Right. Something that's designed. Yeah.
Yeah, something
And
that's designed.
defensive, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
So we were talking before the show about like a forest being more of an adventure, and it could be a dungeon in a way, but there's a distinction there. And you also brought up a point about dungeons being like where you keep your prisoners. I was reading a while back about oubliette. There's a magic card called oubliette. It's like, what the hell is that? What does it mean? And that's kind of the roots of the word dungeon. And oubliette is where you would drop prisoners, and it was kind of like a torture chamber, but you literally just left them there. So they're in the dark, and it's more of like a psychological torture, which is pretty grim. So it was that time period.
Yeah, they call
So
it the Dark Ages for a reason.
yeah. So a dungeon back then would have been like you're saying, where you keep your prisoners. It's more of I think actually one of the coolest is in Game of Thrones, the sky prisons, right? In the
Mhm.
Eyrie, where they're up on the cliffs and you have an open edge. I was
Yeah, that's
terrified when
intense.
I saw that, but yeah. So that's kind of the origins of a dungeon, and it's evolved to be this adventure of like, oh, okay, usually there's some guards or patrols. Maybe it's like a tomb, right? So there's undead or ghosts or something. But let's maybe draw a harder line from something that's more like an open adventure where you go to a village or a forest or a celestial realm.
Yeah. So as far as our purposes today, specifically, we're talking about something that is constructed, right?
Hmm.
Because it creates a very different atmosphere. Speaking on that exact topic, how does one theme their dungeon? Like who makes a dungeon? That's I think the first question you want to
Mm.
ask when you're designing one, and probably the most important question you want to ask if you're going to delve into one. Who made it? And I think the first thing I would reach for is someone who's paranoid or who has something to protect. I think that informs a lot of the layout, because if you're storing, a treasure hoard underground, or like or if you're like a paranoid king or something, that might be your tomb, and you don't want people to come and disrupt you or whatever. I think knowing who makes a dungeon and why they made it is
It's the context.
will yeah
Hmm.
the context will tell you a lot about what to do with the rooms
Mm.
and how they should feel and look.
Right. I can recall a few adventures from like earlier podcasts and things like that, where let's say they're going into like a dwarven fortress or a ruins or something. A lot of the times it's vague. It's like it's just some dwarven underground thing, you know.
Yeah.
That's how they live. They just build these giant cities, and you're going into adventure, right? And there's some mystical door, and it's sealed with earthen magic or something. And it's a little bit vague, you know, so having a little bit more as a DM, designing it a little bit more. You mentioned kings and their tombs. I think that's really interesting to put in the context of like a pyramid, right? Maybe like a Mayan style pyramid or Egyptian, and like that's where the king is buried, and obviously you'll get your treasures and maybe some kind of magical power or artifact down there. So that's a pretty cool idea. I might explore that in the future. But we grew up reading Drizzt, which is a Forgotten Realms story, and multiple times he encounters wizard's towers.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
the
so
Wizard's Tower is the iconic dungeon.
so classic. I know that there's an early D&D, maybe an AD&D adventure set in a wizard's tower. So that's one of the most iconic examples. They're a lot of fun to explore. You get to play with traps and magical encounters that'll challenge your players' arcana skills, investigation skills. You can throw some really wacky monsters in there. Yeah, what other classic examples do you think? We talked about tombs. I think caves are another classic dungeon delve.
Ca- Caves are a classic, but I think that they lack something important, which is the element of traps. I think that's essential to a dungeon experience because they're they attack a player or character rather in a different capacity. So they're challenges of the player's ability to think tactically and approach combat, right? A trap is something that forces the player to think in terms of both like resources. So the trap is often there to either make a combat encounter harder, if you pair them together, like you fall into a pit and there's an opening in the pit and there's a monster down there, which is like kind of a classic, like Star Wars-esque thing going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it's there to wear away at your hit points or your spell slots to make the next encounter more threatening before you get there, right? So I think traps are essentially an attrition tool for a DM, which is what makes dungeons so interesting. In my personal estimation, is that they're good. They attack a player in multiple angles.
Right. It's almost like the meta attack, whereas combat are like more concise. There's a clear enemy in front of you, and it's not that over time sparing your resources and such.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately traps are most at home in a dungeon, which is what makes them so, which is why they're good for a unique, interesting, distinct gameplay experiences. They're really built for that.
So I'd like to explore two ideas in there. The first is this kind of attrition and resource idea. So another one that doesn't get used as often, I think, is players' resources. Outside of their health and spell slots, you have like food, and some DMs are a little looser with that, like you're traveling, and they'll let you just collect rations by hunting or gathering while you're on the road. But in a dungeon, those things are less available, and you might have to track it more accurately. You might track your ammo or require your players to, which can be tedious to some people, but I find it really interesting, a little more realism. And there's a pressure, it's like, oh, can I collect all my arrows? So I find that interesting and fun. It allows you to play off that attrition a little bit more. And the second idea to explore there kind of curtails off of that, where players need to be prepared for it. Now, when I'm building a character, you get a certain amount of gold, usually. I mean, depending on DM's discretion, but I like to build a crazy kit full of interesting things. You can use caltrops and ball bearings, and I go crazy with that rope. Right? How much rope can I carry? Because maybe I'll need it. Having nets, and they might not all have combat applications, but in scenarios with traps and dungeon delving, you want to have rations, torches.
Yeah.
So being able to explore items and make them useful is a lot of fun as a player. So building those opportunities into your design as a DM makes it interesting for them.
Yeah, I think if your players are into that sort of thing where they get to do the preparation and the expectations of low resources. I think it's a really fun gameplay that you kind of miss out on if you're doing like a forest adventure or a little city mystery. Like you generally don't have to track your rations in a city.
Right.
Like spend an amount of gold per day and you will sleep at an inn and eat 3 meals. But if you're in a dungeon, that obviously doesn't apply. So I think it's an interesting way to, like you said, make certain things more relevant. Let's see. How about we try something new? I'm going to throw a random encounter question at us.
Nice. Yeah, let's give it a shot. So let's pick up with random encounter table.
Random encounter table. So I'm going to roll a die and ask a corresponding question on our random encounter table.
What do we got?
Oh, we got a 1. This is super topical. What is your favorite trap? Oh, man. You go first. I haven't thought about it.
So I have 2 favorites. One because it's so iconic, which is a pit full of spikes.
Yeah.
And another reason why that's so cool is because you can build one in the woods. Right? We used to live in a wooded area, kind of not outside of town, but it's up on a hill and there's some woods around us. And I don't think we ever actually did this, but we did lots of similar things where, you dig a hole and you could put some sharpened sticks down there and then kind of cover it up. I'm glad we never did that because someone walking in the woods or whatever would have,
Get seriously hurt, of course.
impaled their foot. Yeah. But the other one is actually maybe not a dungeon trap per se, but it's my brother, our other brother Sid, just watched Predator, the Predator movie. It was a little goofy and dated, but also very fun. And he does a trap toward the end there with like this. I don't remember how he set it up exactly. I think it was like a branch that was propped up, and if it got knocked out at the right angle, something would collapse down. And as a hunter, you'll often see like 2 rocks or a rock and a stick, and then some little bait underneath. Like a rabbit might go down there, knock the stick down, and get crushed. So I guess it's more like a rodent hunting trap, but you could do it on a larger scale, I'm sure. And it's like, oh, okay, the players think this door will lead them to the next room, but actually it's a support, and when you pull it out, everything collapses and they get crushed. Something fun like that. So anyway, yeah. What are your thoughts on cool traps?
I think probably right now, my favorite trap is, so I guess spoilers for Castle Strahd. There's a shoot trap where if you step in the wrong square or whatever, you'll fall through a chute and end up somewhere totally different, like a floor down or whatever. I think it creates an interesting. So there's a classic axiom, of course: don't split the party, never split the party. Well, what if you just make them split the party? Yeah, you force it, and then you've got one person on their own, a floor down from everyone else.
Does someone follow them to try and help, or do you leave them to their devices? Yeah.
Exactly. Do you try and find another way to, do you try and find the proper level exit, or does everyone fall down the chute and maybe take a bunch of damage, maybe be in a worse spot on a harder level, what have you? Go crazy.
Yeah. I think
it presents interesting choices.
Exactly. And when you can make the players have to come up with something creative, I think that's always going to be better than, oh, okay, there's a clear solution to this. Let's get crafty.
Yeah.
Nice. That also is a cool adventure because it takes place in a castle. And one of the resources we didn't talk about earlier is resting, right? When can you rest?
Yeah.
I think in a dungeon, it's much more complicated than if you're in a city or on the road, which are pretty common scenarios.
Yeah. If you're not in a dungeon, you can pretty much just say like, hey guys, we need to take a short rest or whatever, or a long rest, and just be like, all right, we do that. We go to a place where there is somewhere to, we go to a public park and sit on a bench for an hour or whatever. There's lots of opportunities for resting outside of adventures, and specifically outside of dungeons, I think. So the way that you make sure that there's not lots of opportunities inside a dungeon, in my experience, is a wandering monster table or a random encounter table.
Super
which is
clean solution.
a classic, of course. And it's there to make sure that your party doesn't just rest after every encounter, because otherwise they will, because it's an attrition battle. And if you want it to stay that way, and they not just, go Nova every encounter and hunker down for a nice 8 hours, you have to interrupt it. And I think the best way to do that is with a nice random encounter, a wandering patrol or whatever. So that, of course, begs the question, who is wandering around and why?
Right.
I like to do so. So I learned this one from, I think, MCDM or Matt Colville, if you know him by that name better. Every dungeon has monsters in it. A good dungeon has factions of monsters in it, and a great dungeon has factions of monsters in it that have something that they need, like, in common. So if you're in, a sprawling underground dungeon, put a river through it because everybody needs to drink water. And the river, as it intersects with the hallways, is going to be flashpoints of
encounters.
Yeah, of encounters.
Mhm.
You're going to get, like, if there's both Duergar and Drow in this dungeon, that's where they're going to meet. So you're going to get encounters where you have to either fight the Duergar and help the Drow, fight the Drow, help the Duergar,
Mhm.
fight both,
Or
and
sneak
help
around.
neither.
Yeah.
Sneak around. There's lots of opportunities to approach a combat where there's already two sides at war, right?
Mm-hmm.
That comes with its own built-in explanation. Who's wandering? Well, there's a Duergar patrol here. They're coming through and they're keeping an eye on their borders for Drow interlopers.
We're designing both kind of the consistent things that are bound to happen, right? The railroaded events or encounters, and then we also have the randomized stuff. So the overview, right, is going to include the story elements that you just mentioned. Like what's the setting? Why are these things here? Just to give some context to these ideas, let's build a quick Wizard's Tower dungeon, right? So
Sure.
he's protecting a crystal at the top of the tower, right? Simple as that. And then you were hired to,
Some magical artifact.
right, something like that. You were hired to go and collect it. Maybe it's someone was kidnapped, something like that. So you're going into this tower. They're using classic spells, so maybe they're animating golems, and that's their main defense.
Sure.
Right. So you'll regularly encounter patrols, and then there'll also be set guardians at doorways and things like that. Maybe he has some magic familiars, right? So you'll find weird astral creatures that he's summoned. Like a flying cat or whatever, something cool.
Yeah.
I feel
Maybe he keeps
like,
a fairy dragon around or something.
yeah, little fairy dragons. What I was thinking, yeah. And then maybe he also experiments like an alchemist and has some slime creatures, right? So we have a few different creatures. You can maybe theme it even further and say, okay, well, he's part of a dragon cult and he has kobolds and half dragon people and stuff working for him on the perimeter.
Yeah.
So you can kind of theme it a little deeper if you want, but those are generic examples. You build a little chart with some of these, but then you'll also have along the way set encounters. Like as you're approaching, you got the dragon people and they're outside of the tower because they're not that close to him. He wants to distance himself. And he's a secretive guy, so only his inner circle within the tower. You have to even get to the tower first, and that's going to pose maybe skill challenges, some stealth. So that's a little bit about theming, and then approaching it kind of from overhead, right? Is like, well, what's the context of everything? I think that's the most important question when you're designing a dungeon.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The context is hugely important.
You mentioned before we hopped on this idea of telegraphing to your players that they're going into a dungeon.
Yeah. So obviously, if your goal is a survival style, attrition style, adventure in a dungeon, your players will feel cheated if they're not informed ahead of time, right? Because
I just burnt my
the whole
big
point.
spell.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole point of survival and attrition is to prepare for it, to beat the elements, if you will.
Right. You're going on
including
a camping trip.
Monsters.
You got to bring everything with you. I'm going to
Exactly,
need my
yeah.
stove and plan it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't recommend springing a dungeon on a player, on a party unexpectedly. Like you don't want to drop them into, the floor caves out from under them, and suddenly they're in this, underground labyrinth or whatever.
That has happened.
Because that has happened to us.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily bad as long as
It was exciting,
Oh.
and it didn't turn out to be like an extended experience. So in that case, it worked out fine.
Exactly. If you can, if you're going to surprise your players, make sure that there's a quick enough out that they don't,
Yeah,
need
penalized
to.
heavily for not preparing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Alternatively, if you're already running a survival style game, surprising your players with something like that is a interesting way to challenge them because
Right.
they're used to the pattern of preparation and trials.
Right.
Surprising them when they're not totally prepared really makes them think on the fly. But if you're not already running something like that, then you want to get them into the groove by letting them know ahead of time you're going into a dungeon. Best way to do that, in my opinion, is with either a quest, like there's a quest giver in town, they say, whoa, dude, I need X thing from that dungeon. Yeah, I have X problem, Y solution is in Dungeon Z. Or
You might even say, "Bring your wits and supplies."
yes, literally might say exactly that. Or I think the one that I prefer is you drop a rumor. They go to the inn, because you always go straight. Well, not straight to the inn, but you always end up at the inn.
Right.
You roll into town, you go to the inn, and they you buy a drink from the barkeep, and they say, "Oh man, you guys are adventurers. I heard there's something out in the wilds." People go in and they don't come back out. That's a hook.
hmm
And when a player hears that, or at least when I hear that as a player, I want to go check that out. I want to find out why people aren't coming back out, and if it will, if I can beat it.
Yeah. It's not forced, but it's incentivized.
Yeah. Or you could drop a piece of loot down there. They say, "Oh man, ex-adventurer with the legendary sword of lost truths just went down into this hole in our back garden
Mhm.
and left it down there because they died."
Yeah. If he couldn't make it, no one can.
Exactly.
Well, now I have to prove it. Yeah.
So just let your players know they're going into, or here's one that I actually designed for my game and have not yet gotten to use. So this is live in the world of Thea.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. There's a tomb that has yet to be plundered all the way because it was what's the word, like well protected, well trapped and puzzled, and it's set in the swamps, and it started to sink into the swamp. So you go in, you've got a matter of time, some amount of time before it's gone forever. You lose your chance, and everything that's down there will be lost to the swamps. But if you go in, it might sink while you're down there.
Yeah. I love the natural urgency. And there's a real world example of this right now of I don't know if it's a tomb exactly, but it's a sealed off area that has yet to be explored for thousands of years in the Terracotta Army, which is the only term that I'm familiar with to describe it. I'm not sure if it was some kind of tomb or whatever. I believe this is in China. There's a sealed off area, like a vault, I guess, that there was an attempted exploration of it, but basically a trap released this toxic water that now maybe what I heard, because this was secondhand, right? I didn't read the article. Maybe it's all fabricated, but I thought that was crazy. And basically, we don't have the technology right now to get through this ancient trap with, toxified chemical water or something.
That's
It'll
wild.
flood apparently the whole Terracotta Army, and they don't want to move the statues for preservation
Of course.
reasons. So it's a very complicated situation, and your swamp reminds me of this, which I'm very excited to see how that plays out. It's a cool setup.
Mm.
So let's go ahead and, if you don't mind, we can roll on our table again and see
Yeah,
what we
let's do
get
it.
for a quick question.
All right, this time we get number 3. What is your best moment in D&D?
I will point out real quick, Max has dice on hand, which I was impressed with. That's an obvious, of course we should, but I was just going to use an online thing. So, what is our favorite D&D moment? I'm going to have to take a
Best
second,
moment, favorite moment? Yeah.
yeah, and reflect, because we've had many.
Oh, I know what mine is off the top of my head.
Oh, go for
I'm
it.
pretty
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
There was an adventure we were doing with one of our DMs, Chuck, where we went to, I think it was the city of El Terrell, which is known for having its own sun, and it was like corrupted in some way and was like feeding an evil god, I want to say. I'll be honest, the details are pretty foggy. This is some, 8 years ago or something.
Yeah, basically.
And I dropped a bomb into it from atop the back of a griffin and blew up their dark god worshipping powers, and did accidentally put the sun out.
Yeah, we blew up
I
the
think
sun.
that's probably my favorite. Yeah,
That
I
was
blew up
a
the
very big
sun. It was
moment.
great.
Yeah. So there have been so many moments that were exciting. They were critical hits or they were critical misses. Um,
Of course.
but there's a legendary moment in a campaign that I joined, and I joined just after this had happened. So Yoshi was DMing for us,
Of
and
course, yeah.
I just heard rumor, and it comes up every time we play, right? Of, oh, remember that time when we were forced to jump off this bridge and we all died? And Yoshi said, you guys weren't forced, you chose to. And he basically allowed them to survive and, did a little behind the scenes work to make that happen. But I just laugh every time because I'm like, man, how did that play out? If only I was there. So I guess,
That's a classic.
yeah, one of my favorite moments I wasn't even there for, but it's a great story.
That is the nature of being a DM sometimes, is you put a challenge that can be overcome in front of your players, and they choose instead to do something that will kill everyone,
Yeah.
and you have to think real quick on your feet to make sure that they don't all have to bring new characters next
It
time.
could just kill them all. Back in the day, I feel like that was more common. But nowadays, people are attached to their character, and you want to make it through the whole adventure. So,
Yeah,
all right, let's be a little more lenient, and that's more of my style. I'm more of like a fast and loose rather than by the rules, because the goal for me is to create a story together, not necessarily to unfurl a giant math problem, right? And
yeah,
the rules are there as an outline to help us. This is something Matt Colville talks about, where your encounters might not have a set number of monsters, or your monsters might not even have a set amount of HP, right? And as the DM, you decide, okay, they've been fighting it for 20 minutes now. They've hit it 20 times or something. It's like, all right, that's a lot. He's probably dead by now, right?
mm,
So after a certain amount of time, you're like, oh, that was a great crit. He's limping now, or he doesn't have a
yeah,
hand and he has to attack you with his shield, something like that. So you can kind of make those calls when it feels right, or I wouldn't necessarily play with armor class because if someone rolls a 16 and hits, and you're like, yeah, that seemed right. He did a heroic stunt, and then I'll give him a hit for that. And then the next guy rolls a 15 and misses. They're like, why is that inconsistent? So
hmm
you want to have some consistency for sure, but also you can play with some of the things that the players don't see, like HP and pre-designed things.
yeah, definitely. I do some amount of that in my own games where I will like if an encounter is just way too easy, I'll just beef up the HP a little bit and just say like, oh man, this guy died in 2 hits. This is not appropriate for the level that they're at.
Needs a little more help.
He didn't die. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I generally try not to beef up damage if at all possible,
Mm.
because increasing the HP effectively is increasing the damage that they deal, because it increases the number of rounds they live, gets them more attacks off, right? So if I'm gonna modify invisible stats, I'm gonna do it one at a time, just to make sure that things don't get too out of hand too quick.
Right.
Um,
And the last thing to be adjusted, if ever, is the damage. Because
Yeah.
if they hit a player, you don't want them to one shot you.
Yeah, definitely. That's always an awful feeling.
Yeah.
I tend to play so in my campaign, I don't have like it's not a hard rule, but my players they're not gonna die unless either the luck is just really really colossally against them. Like if they just can't roll above a 10, that's bad luck, and that just happens. Like I can't do anything about that.
Right.
I'm not gonna fudge the AC, you know.
Yeah. A little bit like we were
Um,
saying with older D&D, players expected their characters to die by level 3. You know?
yeah,
So if you can adjust your expectations with the players, that might be something that they're interested in, that they find fun. And then you can say like, dude, you have terrible luck. Like, if you don't roll the
you
16,
got a
you're gonna
pun.
die. You know?
Yeah, so terrible luck will in fact kill my players. The other thing that will kill my players is incredible stupidity. So if they did choose to
Yeah.
jump off of a bridge, I would probably just be like, "You fall 100 feet, you die on the ground." Like I don't know
Yeah.
what you're expecting there.
Snap your neck, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, like sorry, you're not living that fall.
You know, God. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm typically not inclined to be too forgiving with something that should obviously lead to death. But as long as the mistake is the cause of death is on my end, like if I'm rolling really really hot, like I can't roll below an 18, like I think in my last session, I just like hit after hit after hit after hit.
Mhm.
It was just like all right, the next one misses. Like I'm not gonna I'm gonna roll a die. I'm gonna look at it and I'm just oh they rolled a 5.
Behind my screen, you know? Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
which is why I keep a DM screen. Or if I really really mistune my encounters, which I do
Mhm.
sometimes, I do some amount of my own monster design, right? Which I think every DM should do because it's a lot of fun and it's really interesting and it keeps curveballs coming at players who know the manuals. You know, like if you've been playing 5e for years now, like we have, at some point you get a feel for what most of the monsters do, or
Mhm.
I mean, if you're a DM, you literally know what most of the monsters do probably because you read the books. So DMing for other DMs or DMing for experienced players, I like to make my own stuff and just
Surprise
keep the
them.
curveballs coming.
Yeah. Keep it
Yeah,
coming.
and sometimes you get the numbers wrong, and you just got to be like, "Ooh, whoops, I'll turn that down a little bit."
Mhm.
Matt Colville says encounter design does not stop when you roll initiative, and I think that is
Mhm.
good advice.
Very nice. Yeah.
Um,
So I just had an interesting idea that maybe if your play group is looking for a little change or just something, a fun short adventure, one of the game genres that I really enjoy is roguelikes. So just a very simple dungeon delve. It doesn't have to have a whole ton of story, but it could be a lot of fun for your mega dungeon isn't exactly like this because it's on a large scale, but let's just do some random adventuring, and players can
yeah,
kind of fill in the story on their own. So that can be fun too if it's just fun to design dungeons. Like let's see what they look like. So that could be a quick little adventure. I was curious, Max, if you had any shout outs this week.
any shout outs? Let's see. Oh, actually, yeah, MCDM. I've been following them a lot lately. They released the Kickstarter pledge for their game, and you can. I think it should still be. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't still be up. You should be able to donate it to it. I did. I'll be getting hardcover copy of both of their books. They're gonna do like one rules manual and one monster manual. If you haven't seen the video for it, there's one on their channel. Go look it up. They have the link in the description. Definitely check that out.
Nice. I recently saw a thumbnail for a video. It might or might not be for my next shout out. I can't recall, but I saw this thumbnail. It said like D&D killers, and it was all these other game systems that come out from independent content creators, and that was one of them. I can't remember if it was from this guy or from a different channel, but the channel I wanted to shout out was Profession Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft. I might have sent you one of his videos a long time ago. Have you come across him?
Dungeon Craft. I may have. The name rings a bell, but I have not. They make their own like terrain and stuff.
I think I came across him first talking about what did he call them? They were like battle maps. They're like a spherical, I'm sorry, circular map that you play combat on, and it's based on
Mm.
zones rather than a grid. So you're in this zone, and you're a certain range from. This is kind of like for boss encounters, but not strictly for that. So there's kind of like in the center of the circle, you have like the heat of combat, the melee, and then outside in these different zones, you might be hitting someone from behind. It was a very cool system, worth checking out. But I think he actually wrote some of the old school adventures for Wizards of the Coast, and he's currently just teaching outside of doing his channel. But he has some really cool content on being a dungeon master. I believe he actually released his own game called Deathbringer. So very cool channel. That's where I get some of my hobby news. That's where I kind of keep up to date. Another channel that's pretty cool. He does a lot of D&D, but he has dabbled with like war games. Is Jeremy from Black Magic Craft, and he does a lot of terrain type of stuff.
I think that's the guy I'm thinking of.
Yeah. He has a game as well called Idols of Torment, and I think this one is like where you're a faction of devils and you're fighting other devils and you're trying to rule hell. But I might be getting that mixed up with something. He put out a game. It seems pretty interesting, and if you're interested in like crafting your own dungeons and tiles and tabletop, he has some cool content for that.
Nice. I think crafted like specifically bespoke stuff like I'm building an X dungeon. I want to craft my own terrain specifically for it. Well, can add a lot of atmosphere to gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, I've just been using. I think it's just called dungeon paper. It's just like a 30-inch wide, roll of paper, and it's just got grid on it, and
This is the one
cut
that you
off a
can
piece.
draw on?
Yeah, and just like Sharpie on it, and when you're done with that map, fold it up and stick it, in a book or whatever, and pull it back out the next time you need to run that area or whatever.
Yeah, I like
That way you're
that.
not like
So
erasing and redrawing.
yeah, which was what we grew up with. There was a lot of like the dry erase maps, which are
Yeah.
amazing, very versatile. But as you say, being able to reuse, like, oh, I have this from 10 years ago, it's super cool.
It can be handy.
Yeah.
I'm currently using one of those wet erase maps, just because I ran out of dungeon paper. I need to put in an order for some more, I guess. But like they're great for a lot of things, but the one thing that they're not good at is backtracking, and especially when you're dungeon delving, there's a lot of backtracking.
Yeah. Ooh, that brings to mind one of my favorite things as a player when we dungeon delve is to draw out the map. So when your DM gives you very minimal information and it's kind of like bare bones, no HUD, even maybe no minis, right? If you go way back, I remember doing car D&D in high school. I kept a set of dice, and I'd be like, "All right, Andrew, go ahead and roll for that," and he'd roll, and
You roll in the cup
that's
holder.
all we do. Yeah, and then it's all just theater of the mind. So when you have pretty bare bones adventure, the players can do things like draw maps to track, and it'll be somewhat inaccurate, just like it might be in real life. you know.
Mm.
So I find that super fun. Again, it's not for everybody. Some people want a little more structure, which makes things clear, and the table can communicate a little bit better when there is that clarity.
Yeah.
So it's all a balance. There are different ways to play, and they're all a lot of fun.
I'll point out if you're gonna do loose like descriptions on like rooms and stuff, don't give measurements, right? Because people will always ask like, oh, how big is this room? Just say like, oh, it's pretty big.
It's a pretty big room. It would take you.
Let
2
them
minutes
take
to
a
walk
guess.
across. Yeah.
Yeah, let them take a guess, and if they're drawing out their own map, that's how you get them to draw it slightly inaccurately or whatever, and you can really surprise them with some stuff like hallway loops around where they didn't expect it to because they drew something too big or too small or whatever.
Right. That's cool. So yeah, mapping is one of my favorite things as a DM and as a player. So if you can incorporate that in your adventures, it'd be a lot of fun. And I think, Max, we can wrap up with some story time. What was your last D&D session, and what went down?
Oh, so my last D&D session. So my last one was the one I played with you, so I'm gonna let you handle that one. But the last one I ran was in My World Thea. So my players are going through an adventure right now in a forest, and there's like a sort of a sickness, a corruption in the forest, and they traveled from the house of a druid who lives there to the outermost edge of the corrupted area, or the most corrupted area. And when they got to the outermost edge, they were confronted by a group of mercenaries from the nearby town, the town that they came from. They were stopped, they were attacked by these mercenaries, and this is actually really cool. I expected the fight to be way too hard for them, but they cleaned it up pretty well. They cleaned it up really succinctly. They still took some serious hits because of some absurdly lucky crits, and someone actually, I think, went down, didn't die, but like
They were rolling for death. Yeah.
they were. It was, I think it was their NPC helper was
Oh.
like, I think he dropped to 0 hit points and someone revived him or something. I might be misremembering that, but he got really low. Is the point? This next coming session, they will be encountering the final boss, the center of the corruption, and I'm really happy with the design of this encounter. I'm super looking forward to it. It's a dryad who lives in an old tree with a corrupted sword stuck through her heart and into the heart of the tree. She's going to not teleport, but like dryads have like something they can do where they can move between trees. There's going to be a couple trees in the area of the fight arena,
Ooh.
and she's going to move between them using the connected roots system, and like assault players using the pine needles from the trees that she's in. She's tied to these points. She'll be jumping around. The ranged attackers in the party are going to have to, like prepare actions, wait for her to pop out, and nail her or something. So I couldn't figure out what the melee characters in the party should be doing until I realized, like, oh my god, they can attack the roots in the trees to cut off her options.
Ooh, yeah. Oh, dude, that's
Yeah,
such a clever combat. I like it.
thanks. I'm really happy with it. I can't wait for my players to get to it, and I'm hoping that they get there before this comes out because they will listen
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. That reminds me of a point you brought up earlier, and I feel like we should hammer it home, is combining traps and combat, just because it makes it a little more complicated and interesting, and you have to puzzle solve a little more. So I think that's super
Yeah.
fun. Maybe a building's on fire and you have to escape while you're fighting or something. But there are lots of ways to play it out. This is a cool one. It's not exactly a trap, but the combat is complex. Yeah, there are other
Mm.
things.
There's also going to be some minions and stuff running around or whatever, little skellies.
Exactly. Ooh, nice. That sounds like a cool adventure. My most recent session, like you said, we did it together. This is our campaign in Avernus, and I really enjoyed our last session. So combat slows things down a lot, and when there's a cool combat, it's a lot of fun. But we actually didn't have any combat. It was all
Oh,
investigation.
we didn't.
You're right. So we got a lot done, which is funny,
Yeah.
'cause combat takes 2 hours. So it can take 2 hours. But there was a lot more role playing, so you get to see people with their goofy traits and social interactions. We did a lot of purchasing, so we kind of pooled our money to buy some bigger ticket items. What did we buy exactly? We got some information about ways to collect blood that we need for a ritual, and we got some dynamite to kind of blow up a chasm and free this entity. There was the barber is kind of like the innkeeper in the sense that she's the one with rumors and information. So we paid for
Yeah.
her visit, and it's also cool because everyone gets a haircut when they go to collect rumors. We got
Yeah, you get to have a little fun with it.
our bunny character got a crazy mohawk going all the way down his tail. So yeah, it was a fun session. We got to talk to Mahadi, which is also a magic card. So that was
Is he?
fun. Yeah, yeah, he's in my peasant cube. He's a link.
Oh, nice.
So
No kidding.
yeah, he's good in the sacrifice archetype. So I
That
saw
makes
him
a lot of sense.
as a card first, and then we met him in D&D, and I was like, oh, he's great.
Yeah, I
Um,
did something similar. So I downloaded Baldur's Gate 1 recently,
yeah.
and met a number of characters who are magic cards for, well,
Oh,
to me were magic cards first.
mhm.
Like there's a monk who's really cool.
I don't think I know him because I don't follow rares.
He's not rare. I think he's
Okay.
uncommon. He has
Okay.
a mechanic with dealing toughness for damage instead of power or whatever,
That's a fun one.
which is not something I'm super interested in. But he has really evocative art, so I think I either already have or planned to use his art as a token because I when I play
Yeah.
on battle mats I use these little hole punches. I have a 1 inch one and a 1.5 inch one, and I just buy magic cards and crunch out the art and use those.
Yeah.
I've got some of
There's
them here.
some great art for that too. You just
Phenomenal.
quick little
Like I've
token.
got this little guy here. He's just a little
Ooh,
peasant guy, a blacksmith.
perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot of really perfect art in Magic for exactly this. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. That brings to mind a topic that we'll probably cover in a future episode, which is like converting mechanics or characteristics between game systems. You know,
Yeah,
maybe you love this character in a novel, but there's not a rule or a class for exactly what they do. So you have to kind of adapt or create some homebrew rules. So that's something really fun, converting magic cards into characters or vice versa or monsters. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that in the future. And then also we'll probably come back and talk more about dungeons because I feel like there's almost an endless amount of subtopics within there to cover. So
yeah, definitely. I just wanted to make sure that we got everything I was hoping to
mhm.
to. Oh, actually, there was one thing. So dungeon delving, specifically telegraphing to your players like you're going to go into a dungeon, gives you. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be dungeon delving, but it lets you. It's a good place to tailor experiences for characters, right?
Mhm.
Where you can say like, uh, "There's going to be chests for a rogue to unlock." There's
Bring your
going to
lock.
be, yeah, bring your lockpicks, exactly. That sort of thing. Like there's going to be locked door or stuck doors that your barbarian can push open or something like that.
Mhm.
Um,
Unique challenges for each character's strength.
yeah, just it's a good place to make sure that there's something for everyone to
Mhm.
do. Like I've tried to do with my my dryad encounter is you
Mhm.
can make sure that everyone has something unique and cool. And while say ranged characters have emphasis in my particular combat because they're going to have the easiest time doing damage to the dryad, there's still something for non-ranged characters to do. Much the same as in a lot of dungeons, you can make sure that there's you know locked doors for your rogue. They will shine in that moment, or they may not be super important at lockpicking isn't going to be super important in a cave dungeon,
Right.
but you
You
know
can make sure that everyone has a way to use their strengths. I
yeah,
so I think your Dryad encounter is a great example because you put some emphasis on this, and melee characters being used to hinder the mobility of an enemy is so outside of their normal purview. So I usually play a melee character because parties need someone to protect the rest of the party and also just to deal flat damage, right? Okay,
yeah,
most adventures will have a use for physical damage, consistent physical damage, right? So it's a good roll, but it's very samey, right? It's like okay, I'll always run forward and I'll try and block the biggest guy, and slash at him.
yeah,
But being able to uh, come up with a different role for them using the same strengths is super cool. So if you can find ways to maybe there's a chest and there is no lock, right? So this isn't a thief challenge. The barbarian has to smash it, or
yeah,
the wizard's gonna cast a spell and it's like that didn't do anything. It's not magically locked. They might have to puzzle through it, and I think that's a lot of fun. Although there was a dungeon we did one time, and this will just be a quick story, where there was a total red herring, and I think it actually was a red herring. There was a herring
yeah,
in this pool in a dungeon, and we went on for like an hour trying to figure out, how it was related to the puzzle of the dungeon. And at some point someone asked, "What color is it?" Or is it red? And the
What
DM's
kind of
like,
fish is
"It's a
it?
red herring," or yeah, whatever. And
Classic.
yeah, so that could be a big waste of time. And it actually was a lot of fun, even though we wasted an hour and like we're thinking through every, like, oh, how could this be used? Is it mystical? It turned into a good story, a good
Yeah,
night.
it's a classic. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up real quick, which is, of course, dungeons and puzzles.
Mm,
Puzzles are a natural place for, or dungeons are a natural place for puzzles to fit in. So, like, if you're going to include puzzles in your world, and you should, because I think they challenge, once again, they challenge players uniquely in ways that traps and monsters don't. Dungeons are kind of the best place for them in my experience.
Mhm.
You want to put them in a place that is designed to hinder progress, like a dungeon with traps in it. They're traps of a different sort.
mm.
Puzzles are a trap of a different sort, and dungeons are a good home for them.
Yeah, it's an opportunity as a DM to flex the muscle of creating a unique challenge and dropping hints at solutions without being overt, without making it super simple, like, oh, you have to make an investigation check. You found the stone that's sticking out at the wrong angle. You press it, door opens.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Typically, I don't like the idea of using rolls to figure out puzzles. It's
mm,
not very good for that.
right. It's best when it's the players observing the environment and the DM being able to describe that environment in a way that allows them to recognize something interesting or a different approach, right? So it might not
Yeah.
even be, oh, we can't pass through this, but there's an optimal way to pass through this
Mm.
if we find the key.
Yeah. I think the reason puzzles persist, at least in my games, is that you can't complete a puzzle without being immersed in the game.
Mm,
Like there is no world in which you figure out a puzzle without thinking in terms of the world you inhabit. I mean,
mhm,
I guess that's not true if you're doing if you're just gonna put like a sliding tile puzzle into your game. That's fine. Um, those are cool. They're interesting. I like sliding tile puzzles.
mhm.
In fact, I would play games to do sliding tile puzzles. Like, oh, I don't know. There was one that came out. Um, it escapes me, but I've played puzzle games before. I like
Right,
that
right.
stuff. But thinking in the world is what puzzles are best at, and they have flaws. They're usually they tend to have one solution, and they require players to get on your wavelength of thinking, which
Mm,
is not always useful. But they're good at making your players think in terms of the game world.
right. It increases immersion for that purpose.
Yeah,
Increases,
exactly.
yeah. And it also engages players, which can be an issue, I think, with lengthy combats or conversations that don't utilize a particular player's strengths, right? It's like,
Mm,
okay, if this guy's going to shine for the next 20 minutes during a conversation, my character's just sitting in the background. So a puzzle kind of engages everyone in that way. Okay, you guys have to
yeah,
think about how you're going to work together or how you're going to solve it.
yeah. I think that's the last thing that I wanted to talk about regarding dungeon delving, at least this time.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll come back and do dungeon delving 2.
I think at some point we'll have to, and it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you all for
So,
joining us today. Yes.
yeah, I will see you all in the next session.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.